Thank you all. It's good to be back up here again, despite those very welcoming comments from Faraz Rahal this morning. So happy to be hosting the glaucoma session, Innovation versus Standard of Care. For those of you who don't know, I am actually a practicing glaucoma specialist. I run a venture capital fund in my free time, but I spend about half of my days taking care of glaucoma patients. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm fortunate enough to be joined on stage with four incredible people who are going to help us answer some of the questions regarding the current state of glaucoma management. And I was a little encouraged because somebody in some panel earlier today actually said glaucoma is cool, right? Somebody said glaucoma.
I heard that.
Right? You heard that too. So I was like, yes. I remember it was probably 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know if Emmett Cunningham is in here, but he asked me why I thought that there was so much difficulty in getting glaucoma studies done. And I think my answer was something like glaucoma sucks or something like that. It was like a really, kind of offhanded answer about, how challenging it was to get things done in glaucoma. But I think it's clear from listening to the companies today that we're actually getting a lot done. I think the question for this panel is, what do we need? We have, we have some stuff that we do pretty well in glaucoma and some stuff that needs to change. So we're going to helping me answer those questions. We have Dr. Jessica Steen, who's an associate professor and the director of the glaucoma service at Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale. Dr. Jeffrey Goldberg, who we've heard from a little bit so far this meeting, who's the professor and chair of ophthalmology at Byers Eye Institute in Stanford. He's also co-founded a couple of companies, right? He's MSL, which is the magnetic cell therapy company, and Peripherex, which is a visual field company. We have Dr. Alexander Gebauer, who I know very well, he was a neuropharmacologist and a clinical pharmacologist, but is the co-founder and executive chairman of Galimedix, which is a portfolio company for InFocus. I've had the pleasure of working with Alex for many years. And finally, Dr. Adrienne Graves, who I've also known for quite some time, who's, pretty amazing pedigree for Adrienne over there, right? Visual neuroscientist, completely passionate about the innovation space in general. Former CEO of Santen. She's on, how many companies are you on the board of now?
9.
Nine serial board member. Co-founded Glaucoma 360, right? So, and she's on the board of the RD fund, a whole bunch of things, right? So, some great names. So let's get started and talk about the first thing I think that most people think about with glaucoma is lowering intraocular pressure. And we have some pretty good therapy to lower intraocular pressure at this point. So the question is, we're innovating, do we need more IOP-reducing drugs? Do we need more medicine to lower pressure, or are we doing a good enough job now? So Jessica, why don't you start?
The therapeutic strategies that we have, we can now target specific locations, whether we're thinking about increasing trabecular outflow, reducing intraocular pressure through reduction of aqueous production, or targeting the uveoscleral outflow. But when we really look at the therapeutics that we have, there's one major gap, and that's really nocturnal intraocular pressure lowering. So a strategy that effectively lowers intraocular pressure in the evening as well as or better than during daytime hours.
Jeff, you're nodding. You have comments on that?
I think that's an excellent point, Jessica, and really one of the I would say, few remaining needs in the IOP space. I think the others, because we have a very good, in prostaglandin analogs, we already have a fairly effective and very well tolerated drug. It really sets the bar. You've got to be as good or better in an alternative mechanism of action to really make an inroad into the market, as good or better than a standard prostaglandin, and that sets a higher bar than the FDA sets with timolol. I think the other big unmet need would really be sustained delivery in a form factor that really works for the patient and the physician. So I think those are a couple of areas: nighttime, sustained delivery, and of course, if anyone wants to come out with a new molecular entity identity that performs as well or better.
Adrienne, I think, there's two interesting points brought up there. So clearly we don't have enough good IOP-lowering medications potentially. What about your thoughts?
Well, I agree with everything that you two just said, and I definitely come down on the side of innovation, all the cool things that are happening. And I actually once was quoted by saying that glaucoma is hot. Yeah, and that was a couple of years after MIGS device was first approved, and all of a sudden there were a lot more people that wanted to do glaucoma fellowships. So I do believe in innovation, and by the way, thank you, Maureen, thank you, Rob, thank you, Craig, I love this meeting. So while I really come down on the side of innovation, we obviously can't throw out IOP-lowering drugs at this point, and I don't think we need another prostaglandin, but full disclosure, I'm on the board of a company called Qlaris, a glaucoma company, and the mechanism of action is EVP, episcleral venous pressure. And so that can really, set the bar for IOP lowering. We are currently in the clinic with studies in combination with the prostaglandin and as a standalone in normal tension glaucoma. So we possibly will be presenting at Glaucoma 360. So I think something like that's a new mechanism that can actually add something to the armamentarium makes sense.
Right. Obviously, we've been sort of limited by episcleral venous pressure, right? It's hard to get lower than that with pharmaceuticals, so obviously something that lowers the bar obviously makes it a little bit easier. So clearly that'd be a path. Alexander, your company is looking at glaucoma a little bit differently. You kind of care about the lowering of IOP, but you really don't give a crap.
Well, I
so
think
what is it that, how are you approaching this, glaucoma problem?
Yes, we are not working on IOP lowering, but I think as long as we have patients where we cannot control the IOP, I think there is need for further drugs or further approaches. And I think we should also look at the compliance of the patients. I think when in the morning session there are some devices, different things where there's a higher chance that patients will stay compliant and actually use the medication, which we all know not everybody is doing. So I think the medical need is there. I do see a commercial problem because in many territories it will be very difficult getting attractive pricing for an expensive development program once you be on the market. So I'm not sure that I would invest in a company that is developing another IOP lowering drug. I think I would very carefully look at that. But I think medically, yes, the need is there as long as we have a significant portion of patients where we cannot control IOP.
Yeah, I agree, and obviously, that's going to be the focus of drug development going forward. I think the commentary that's very compelling, at least from the meeting and things that I've seen today, is that I think we're finally ready to tackle glaucoma as a disease. And I know it's kind of funny, and I think the joke was always that if you put 50 glaucoma specialists in a room, you get 100 different definitions of glaucoma, right? That's the way we kind of view it. But I think ultimately you'll realize that we have to start to tackle the disease process directly and not the surrogate, which is IOP. Alex, why don't you tell us about neuroprotection at Galimedix?
Yeah. Being the odd neuropharmacologist here on this forum and in this room, I think what we try to do, we come to the eye from the backside. So in a past life, I also worked on memantine in Alzheimer's. I did not work on the memantine glaucoma program, but did work on Alzheimer's. And we believe that there are common reasons why neurons or neuron-like cells are dying in Alzheimer's, in AMD, and also in glaucoma. And if we can directly protect the cells that are dying, then IOP is no longer that important. Yes, it will always stay as a risk factor for developing glaucoma, but IOP is not a disease. It's just a risk factor for getting the disease. And if we can really directly protect the neurons, that would really approach or open a totally new approach to treatment for the patients. And quite frankly, I think this is what we need more than another IOP-lowering drug.
Adrienne, the Glaucoma Research Foundation, obviously, this is a huge initiative, right? Neuroprotection. So tell us a little bit about what's going on there and how you look at it, and then maybe you can ask Jeff to talk about the project because he's kind of in charge of it, right?
Well, I definitely agree with you that, that's what I'm more interested in. That's what glaucoma patients are more interested in. They want they want to keep their vision. They want, and it would be nice if they could regain some vision. So it's something that I'm very interested in. This one can tell you about some of his own work, which is very fascinating. And I'm certainly very interested in cell therapy approaches and what can be done along that line. Also, I wanted to say that it's something that the Glaucoma Research Foundation is quite interested in. I serve on the board of GRF, and some of you may know, and certainly Jeff knows because he's been funded by our main research program, which is called Catalyst for a Cure. And what we do is we put together a group of 4 scientists with somewhat different expertise from different universities to collaborate, put all their expertise together. And this most recent one that we've funded, for the first time, we also have an Alzheimer's researcher as one of the 4 researchers. And they're looking at sort of common pathways, neurodegeneration pathways in the diseases. And it's quite fascinating. And the group that Jeff was a part of, actually, Andy Huberman was part of that group. He's gone on to many other things since then, but that was tremendously fruitful too. So I don't know if you want to say anything more about that.
Sure, yeah. First of all, let me just credit the Glaucoma Research Foundation for driving so much innovation in our field, both with the science they've been funding over the years, but also just by hosting the Glaucoma 360, which I think is in the annual cycle of meetings is the best glaucoma-focused meeting of the year. So just congratulations and thanks for keeping that up. In part because it really runs a lot like this meeting, which is to say really bringing together industry and academics to talk about what's the latest in innovation across all the spaces. I think neuroprotection is going to be the sort of belt and suspenders approaching glaucoma. You're going to be on your IOP drop or drugs or surgery, and you're going to be on your neuroprotection drug. Just like diabetics take their sugar drug and their ACE inhibitor to protect their kidneys, glaucoma patients are going to have to take their IOP drug to knock out that risk factor and their neuroprotection drug to protect the retina and optic nerve. In the field, there's so many amazing therapeutic candidates that are really coming up that preclinical pipeline right now, but I think even more exciting for our field are the number of drugs that are starting to move into actual clinical testing in our human patients with glaucoma. Obviously, Alex and Galimedix really tackling a new mechanism of action and moving that into human trials. I know O&L Therapeutics here in the audience has presented very exciting data, both for dry AMD, but also as exciting for glaucoma. Neurotex implant is likely to be approved as a neuroprotective implant for macular telangiectasia, but very strong data pointing towards a glaucoma application there. So I think that there's really a lot of intense, hot work and attention from the strategics. Glaucoma neuroprotection is going to be a thing of our future.
Yeah, I think everybody got scared in the past after memantine, right? It kind of created a little bit of a lull in the cycle of looking towards neuroprotection, as a viable pathway. And I'm sure everybody knows the whole memantine story, but it hasn't changed as its position as the kind of the ultimate goal. I mean, after optic nerve regeneration, which we're not going to have the time to talk about today, but clearly being able to protect the optic nerve directly while keeping IOP lower is, I think, really the goal of all glaucoma therapeutics. In the same vein, Jessica, I'm going to ask you a question. We've seen this complete sort of growth of the glaucoma surgical space over the past few years with the advent of MIGS and several other devices. And there have been some failures there too, right? So there are things that have happened that have caused us to reevaluate how we operate in the eye and how we lower pressure. And one of those was the suprachoroidal space, right? So we had CyPass, and CyPass had some issues and failed, and we kind of abandoned the suprachoroidal space for a little while, but it seems like we're heading back there. You think that's a good idea? Should we be going back to the suprachoroidal space as a viable place to lower IOP?
There's certainly advantages in looking into the suprachoroidal space versus other avenues within the anterior segment, from looking specifically at the superciliary space as a space to hold a therapeutic, never mind the devices that are available and certainly under development. I think something unique when we look at the suprachoroidal space, as well as thinking about neuroprotection, is ensuring that we do have strategies that are helpful for patients across the spectrum of disease. When we look in the MIG space, so many of the new devices or new investigations are in mild to moderate glaucoma, but we can't forget about the patients who have advanced disease. And again, I think that's where neuroprotection is something that when we think about it clinically, we've got patients that certainly come in and say, "Doc, is there anything else?" And even currently, when we think about neuroprotective supplementation, maybe where that fits in already. But not just early disease, but making sure that we don't leave behind the patients with more aggressive or already advanced disease.
Yeah, I think we see there's a little bit of a ceiling on the current MIGS market in terms of IOP lowering. And there's a bunch of surgical glaucoma companies out there right now. Jeff, do you think we always have to drain outside the eye? Are we going to have to continue to look into the subconjunctival space for maximum IOP lowering?
It's a great question, and I think the jury's still out on that question. I think there's still, part of our failure into suprachoroidal space was actually nothing to do with the suprachoroidal space. It was really to do with how much you leave in the anterior segment and knock out, corneal endothelial cells. So I think the jury's still out on that question, but I think suprachoroidal remains, I think, a very, titillating possibility for our future, and that's a very significant potential space to play in, and the idea also that you could combine device and drug into that space, that could also be a space for innovation for startups.
Yeah, let me just follow that up with 1 second. So, one of the nice things is about keeping drainage inside the eye is the lack of a need for adjunctive antifibrosis, right? You keep things in the eye, how long have we been using mitomycin now? How many years? 40 years? 40 years is about, so? Do we need anything better? Shouldn't we have something better than mitomycin by this point?
Well, yeah, there are more specific targeting antifibrotics that are now being tested in clinical trials in human patients, as well as obviously the preclinical pipeline that may have less of a kind of the breadth of side effects that mitomycin. If you overshoot on mitomycin, you get in trouble, but there are others that will have a wider window of utility. Of therapeutic utility. So I do think that we will replace mitomycin, or at least maybe supplement it. Maybe you'll be able to use less mitomycin and more of some of the newer fibrosis pathway targeting drugs, macrophage targeting drugs, things like that.
I think there was the AGS web, I think this was probably like 15 years ago, did a little informal poll about how many glaucoma specialists would allow themselves to have a trabeculectomy with mitomycin C. Remember that? And it was like 3%. Literally 3% of the doctors said, I would never let anybody do a trabeculectomy with mitomycin C on my eye, but yet that's kind of the ultimate IOP-lowering surgery that we have right now, so it's probably not great. Adrienne, have you ever taken a visual field test?
I have. Hated it.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
I mean, if anybody here hasn't taken a visual field test, then you should try one if you really want a fun day in the office. What are we going to do about, diagnostic testing? We have, we're still, again, visual field testing, same basic technology. How many years have we been doing this? Is there something better that we're going to come up with?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Well, there are some interesting approaches, sort of a gamification of visual field testing that's not scary and actually fun. There are a couple of companies actually working on that. That's pretty interesting. Unfortunately, traditional perimetry has got to be, since I do have a background in visual psychophysics, and it's got to be like the worst visual psychophysical test ever. And I think it's part of the reason that memantine trials failed. I mean, when there's so much variability, well, there were so many sources of variability in the whole darn program, but there's so much variability in visual field testing in and of itself, and then you throw all the other kinds of variability with all the different sites and people that could be on any medications and had systemic diseases and all sorts of things. I mean, for that trial to have been successful would have been like a needle in a haystack, and I think visual fields are part of that. Now, they were required to be, I believe, the primary endpoint at that point. But fortunately, there are other tests of structure and function that are much more reliable.
Jeff, how does Perforex addressing this?
Yeah, so again, as Rob already disclosed for me, I helped co-found a company, Peripherex, that's actually moving visual field testing, into a more gamified platform. And so it takes that sort of 15-minute stare at a dot test and turns it into a real gamified, where you're sort of following dots around the screen. And it's also now a 3-minute test per eye. And it's also in the home, so it can be done on any computer, like whatever grandma is zooming the grandkids with her built-in camera just built into the laptop or the desktop computer. It works off of that and uses a technology that the co-founders invented that really uses eye tracking. And so it delivers a lot more data, but beyond the sort of structural aspects that make it more fun that way, I think actually generically speaking, being able to move more testing into the home is a future that we have to find in glaucoma, because in our sort of aging population, more and more patients, it is so clogged trying to get visual fields done in the office. Never mind the fact that patients hate doing visual fields in the office, but it is so clogged in the office. I'm sure Jessica could talk about that too, that if we could just move most of that testing into the home for screening, but also for following, for progression, I think that's really has to be an advance. And the more we can move testing in the home without requiring patients to buy individual devices like virtual reality goggles or specialized home OCT machines. I know there's a lot of work in those spaces as well, but it's going to be hard to have every patient own every device. So the more that we can do some of this diagnostic work over the web, I think is going to be a real opportunity to kind of declog the office, facilitate patient flow, and improve diagnostics.
Alex, you're about to begin a week away, maybe, of beginning a clinical trial, right, in neuroprotection.
Yeah.
And how are you tackling those endpoints? Because visual fields are obviously a critical part of proving neuroprotection, right? So how is it that Galimedix has addressed this, this process?
Yeah. So we will be starting any day now a proof of concept study in dry AMD. We are also working on a design of a glaucoma study that will then start hopefully next year. But first study will be dry AMD in US and Europe. And we are using microperimetry. We of course also looking for structural changes, but we are much more interested in function, because in the end this is what patients care about. Nobody comes to the doctor and says, well, I've got GA. People come to the doctor and say, well, my vision is impaired. So we will be looking for function. And with our mode of action, we hope that we should see functional effects rather quickly. So we have an endpoint after 3 months already. It's a 12-month study, but functional endpoint we already have after 3 months. And based on our preclinical findings, we are also hoping that we can show some regain of function. We're not sure whether that will be clinically meaningful or it's just something that we can measure, but let's wait. In maybe 15 months or so, I can tell you more.
So people who may have heard some of the podcasts I do for OAS have heard multiple times that I've stated that the ultimate goal for me is to find companies that would allow me to take care of my glaucoma patients from the golf course, right? I think that's the ultimate goal, is that I could be in a golf cart and still managing my glaucoma patients. So is AI going to help me do that, Jessica? Do you think that there's a role for AI in helping make diagnoses and guide treatment decisions in glaucoma?
I think making diagnoses is a very careful ledge to be on versus finding specific markers, or detection versus diagnosis, which is a very careful line. You know, one of the challenges in moving diagnostics outside of the clinic that I really do think about from a practical clinical perspective is much to the similarity of how our patient portals in our electronic health record systems have changed the way that we provide care. And, you know, really from a physician burnout standpoint, when we are evaluating data, we're evaluating messages, we're responding to data without that interaction of being able to speak to the patient in front of us, it is a burden or a barrier just to keep in mind from a practical standpoint. When we lose that patient interaction, how does that impact the physician's overall experience? And that's absolutely where thinking about artificial intelligence applications in evaluating data points, helping to write reports, helping to flag change analysis is something that I'm truly excited about.
I mean, Jeff, shouldn't it be pretty easy? Like, shouldn't it be kind of easy to just take a AI algorithm, feed it a gazillion visual fields, and teach it how to evaluate those fields, you know, and tell you this patient's getting better, this patient's getting worse. I mean, we have GPA, which is kind of, I guess, the first step towards giving us a little bit of an answer regarding progression, but shouldn't it just be relatively straightforward for AI to solve this?
Yeah, you know, Felipe Medeiros and others are really making great progress on doing exactly that, and there's every indication that off of a visual field or an OCT, we should be able to highly enrich the patients into clusters of these guys are probably safe, and these ones we got to worry more about, have them back into the office sooner. So I think to the degree, Rob, that we could increase your wellness with more time on the golf course.
It's all about
coming.
me, buddy. It's all about me. Yeah. Get me out there the more we can. Adrienne, just you know, how's Glaucoma Research Foundation? How are you going to tackle this? Where are you going to direct kind of funds to help solve some of these problems? What's the priority for you right now?
Well, it's a huge priority, both from a research perspective, as we were talking about before, and it's also the reason that we started Glaucoma 360 to begin with. Like this meeting, we like to highlight early stage companies and evolving technologies and put them together with venture capitalists and other funding sources, put them together with KOLs, put them together with, we usually have the FDA, both on the medical and the device side there, so they can actually just speak to the FDA themselves. You know, we feel like, you know, obviously research is in our very name, Glaucoma Research Foundation, and we have these terrific programs that we've talked about. But we think that you know, patients really don't want to wait too long, and research does take time, and we really feel that that highlighting early stage companies and newer technologies, it's a way that we can help in some way to speed the development in some of those companies and give shorter term hope to glaucoma patients. And we usually have glaucoma patients coming to the meeting, and they love hearing about the newer technologies. It's even the ones that they know are very early stage. It gives them hope that people care about helping them keep their vision and possibly even restore some. So it's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've done a pretty good job at you know, creating a little bit more of an interventional field for glaucoma. We've become a little bit more interventional, right? We've learned how to lower intraocular pressure a little bit better with our great pharmaceuticals. We have some incredible novel surgical techniques, but I think we still need to do a better job of protecting the optic nerve and keeping people's vision longer, and I think we'll get there. I think some of the companies that we've seen here and things they're working on are definitely going to put us on that path. So thank you to the panel. It's been great having you up here, and thank you everyone for listening.